Today's kind of a special day because I'm going to be presenting, starting to get into the deeper presentation of the tabernacle. The title for today is Elder John talked about how to observe the feast, and I'm talking about how to rise and measure the temple of God, because that's how we're instructed to do in Revelation 10 and 11. Our generation, in particular, actually beginning with Ellen White, that's when it began actually, but greater light and greater observances made at the end in our generation. The memory text is for the whole series is from Malachi 4:4. Remember the law of my servant Moses, the statutes and ordinances I command him for all Israel at Horeb. So again, coming to you from BibleExplorations.com during the camp meeting for tabernacles. So yesterday, I started to share with you where we got some of these timeline numbers, because part of measuring the tabernacle is because it's prophetic, measuring against what the biblical record is also for the timeline from Adam to Jesus to our time. And the Bible is incredibly detailed about things like that. So we looked at, first of all, this 1656 years from Adam to the flood of Noah, the 600 year of his life, the time when Methuselah died, who said when he dies, it will come. And so we began that, and then started looking at the timeline from the flood, the Ark of Noah, to the ministry of Christ. I got into the first part. I said to everybody at that time, don't get too out of joint if someone I share here seems to contradict about some of the things you might have observed or believed before, based on prior convictions of this timeline. And so we looked at this 2166 BC date for the birth of Abraham, and how it was really through not just the biblical testimony, but through all kinds of extra biblical records that have been found for archaeology. There are our current knowledge of eclipses and solar events and things where we've been able to go back and look at these different records and be able to actually date precisely when that happened. When we look at either biblical records or records of the Persian kings, when they speak of these things and tie together some very sound things, mostly about the period between the Babylonian captivity, the destruction of tabernacle in 586 BC, up until the time of Solomon beginning to build the temple, and that whole period. So really this calculation really starts with the day of the Exodus at 1446, and it was reliant upon text in Exodus 12:40, the sojourn in Egypt, that indicates the Israelites were in Egypt for 430 years. And counting backwards from 1446, Exodus places Jacob's migration into Egypt at roughly 1876. And I'm going to be expanding on this, but this is what we spoke about yesterday. And we looked at from Jacob to Abraham. Genesis provides a record of the patriarchal ages, which are used to count the years from Jacob's move to Egypt back to Abraham's birth. So we see that Jacob was 130 when he entered Egypt. Isaac was 60 when Jacob was born. Abraham was 100 when Isaac was born. So the resulting timeline is the 1876 plus 130 to 2006 BC plus Isaac's, so 2006, just 2066, and then 100 years from Abraham to the birth of Isaac being 2166. So again, as I said, that's the beginning of understanding. And then, of course, what always happens whenever I begin my presentation like that is you get all kinds of, bombarded with people that want to challenge or question things before we get a chance to present it. So today I'm going to get a chance to present it of why I use this in the tabernacle timelines, and we'll carry that on today. So here is that timeline, and I did this basically 20 years ago, and I did it just strictly through my own studies in the Bible, but I've never changed it. So we look at this time. So if we go to the from Adam to Abraham being born, it's 1948 years. And from BC, it's 2166. So if you add up 2166 and 1948, which would be all the time from Adam to Abraham, and then take these BC times, add them together, you get 4,114 years, which is representative of 1 AD. And of course, there's no zero between 1 BC and 1 AD. It's a, so that time period to get to the ministry of Christ in 27 AD, because there's no zero, you have to subtract 1 from the 27. So you get 26 plus 4114 equals 4140. So just to show you where that comes in. And some of the other dates we talked about yesterday were when the temple was completed, and when the temple was consecrated, which was 1,500 years after the flood, and 1,512 years after the flood was consecrated. That's the running time from Adam, and that's the BC time, 958 BC, 946. So it's reliant on this. And what this is a 2166 BC date is derived from a model based on a long sojourn, which is 430 years. Exodus 12:40 is a literal reading of the Messianic text version, which states, it's going to move this, that Israel's sojourn in Egypt lasted 430 years to the very day. So from the day that Israel or Jacob entered Egypt to the day of the Exodus was exactly the same day, 430 years later. So Genesis, a calculation of the years from Abraham's birth through the generations of Isaac and Jacob, and finally to Jacob's entry in Egypt at 1876. So here's where the discrepancy comes in. So that text at 1240 is from the MT, or the Messianic text. And what's that? That's a standard Hebrew version of the Old Testament that reads, "Now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years." That's the whole text. And that text is what the entire modern Hebrew Bible is today. It's what was used in the King James Bible translation for the Old Testament of the Bible. That's that text, MT. The LXX is the Septuagint, and that was created in Alexandria, Egypt. And it was translation of the Bible, and it adds the phrase to that, "in the land of Canaan and in the land of Egypt." So this expanded version reads, "The sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan was 430 years." So people divide that as 215 years in Canaan, 215 years in Egypt. So that's the 430 years. And that's where the discrepancy is. So those additional words are only found in Bibles that are based on the Septuagint reading. Any other Bible that is not based on that doesn't have those words in there. So you got to really narrow this down and take a good look at it. So what are the main differences between the Septuagint and the MT? Are their language, their origin and development, the canon, and numerous texts. So the MT is the authoritative Hebrew text of the Jewish Bible, primarily in biblical Hebrew with some Aramaic passages. The MT tradition was standardized by Jewish scribes known as the Masoretes between the 7th and 10th century AD that relies on much older traditions. they added vowel markings and meticulous notes to preserve a precise version of the text. The LLX, or the Septuagint, the earliest Greek transition of the Hebrew scriptures, it began in the 3rd century BC in Alexandria. As a translation, its style can vary from literal to more interpretive. They wrote this, they translated Hebrew into Greek. They have all these legends and myths about how 72 scribes got together. They'd each done their own translation. They showed up and every one of them matched exactly. And that's what the Septuagint was. But we know today that it really began in about 325 BC. They only translated the 5 books of Moses. The rest of the translation kind of came over time, over the next century. So it wasn't all even translated by the same people, but they were trying to, it was Alexandria, Greece, which was it was the stomping grounds of Alexander the Great. It was where Hellenization, or the Greek influence was very high, and so it was made to take the Hebrew and put it into Greek. So what are some differences? And I put a little chart together here. So chronology. So where we get these genealogies are really in Genesis 5 and Genesis 11. So Genesis 5 is from Abraham to Noah, and 11 goes beyond that from Noah to Abraham, etc. So the MT provides a shorter overall timeline from creation to Abraham, with the patriarchs having shorter lifespans before their firstborns are begotten. That's where we get the 1656 years. So every Bible that has the 130 years for the firstborn of Adam and continues on there. The Septuagint, or the LXX, adds 1400 years to that timeline by assigning longer ages to the patriarchs in Genesis 5 and 11. And it does it in a weird way. So instead of being 130 years for Adam's firstborn, it's 230. So it adds 100 here, 100 here, 100 here. So that's the one that as far as the verse 12, 40 goes, specifies the 430 years in the MT and adds in the LXX the 215. Adds Canaan and Egypt. So what are some overall differences we can talk about? Well, even in the book of Jeremiah, it contains the version you read in the King James Version today. The LXX is roughly 1/8 shorter and organizes the oracles against the nations after Jeremiah 25:13 does it differently. But anyway, additions are made in the book of Esther and the book of Daniel. So when we read Daniel, we read Esther, we're reading in most of our Bibles the MT. On the LXX, it expands these stories like Esther, prayers from Mordecai and Esther. Daniel adds these other things like Susanna and Bip and the dragon, and so it adds these stories in the Septuagint. Give you an example, in the MT, Goliath's height is listed as 6 cubits and a span, which is about 9 feet 9 inches. The giant in the Septuagint is shorter, given a height of 4 cubits, which is 6 feet 9. So it's more realistic of a tall man, but certainly not a giant. I mean, 6'9", and you've got to take the stone and want to just take a bat and hit him. That's 6'9", as opposed to 9'9". So there's all these differences between these two texts, and I'm pointing them out to get to a more important reason. So when you look at these changes and then you compare them, So let's just compare the genealogies of the MT versus the LXX. The death of Methuselah. Now, Methuselah was Enoch's son. And it was prophesied when he died, it would come. That's what his name means. The judgment would come. So the MT, he died the same year as the flood. However, in the LXX, Genesis 5, he lives several years after the flood. So how can he live when only 8 people got on the ark and Methuselah wasn't one of them? How can he live for years later? Especially when he's the one that when he dies, it will come. That's part of this mistakes that happen when you start to add to the Bible, start to add to the genealogies, add 100 years, add 1,400 years. And they were doing that to try and give to the Greeks an appearance of a longer age for the Hebrews. So scholars have proposed that it was a scribal error in the LXX, specifically in copying Methuselah's age that led to this outcome. But later manuscripts, so you have these ancient manuscripts that have a corrected calculation where Methuselah's death occurs before the flood, suggesting that the earlier editors recognized and attempted to fix the discrepancy. So it wasn't, so that's that's not right. When you have an original translation and then hundreds of years later it's corrected, so the newer manuscripts don't have that mistake. So there's also inclusion in the LXX of somebody never mentioned in that genealogy, which is the inclusion of Canaan. So the LXX post-flood genealogy in Genesis 11 includes an extra figure, Canaan, between Aphrodite and Shelah. This figure is absent from both the MT and the Samaritan Pentateuch. So textual criticism indicates that earlier manuscripts of the LXX did not contain this extra canon, suggesting it was a later addition to the Greek biblical tradition. For example, the Jewish historian Josephus, very well known Josephus, and he often used the LXX, but he also did not include this extra canon in his chronology. Why? Because he had a later copy. He had a corrected copy. So beyond the specific issues, the genealogies add approximately 1,400 years to the biblical chronology from Adam to Abraham, compared to the MT, resulting in a different overall timeline. So when I say that, when I showed you the 1656 years, you couldn't get that number from the LXX. You'd be 1,400 years more than that. So that's useless. And when you take this 215 and 215 rather than 430, you can't use the very specific words in the MT that was 430 years in Egypt. You have to add that and divide this into 215, 215. I want to show you a very easy calculation. This is my own invention. And maybe get yourself a calculator or your phone ready for doing a few numbers as we're talking today, because it's easier when you see it for yourself. So let's say that there was 215 years between Abraham entering or between the Israelites entering Egypt and the Exodus, 215 years. The first 215 years were in Canaan. The second 250 years was in Egypt. And let's assume that the average age per generation was 30 years. So every 30 years, a new generation would be born. So remember, there's 70 people that come into Egypt, and they turn, that time of the Exodus, to over 1 million people, 600,000 men. So if we start up our first number as 215 years divided by 30 for a generation, you get 7.1666. So we'll just use 7. So you get 7 times for the population of double. Every 30 years, doubles. So let's start with 70. And let's just go 70 times 2. And we'll do that 7 times. So 70 times 2 once, times 2, that's twice, times 2, that's 3 times. 2 is 4 times, 2 is 5 times, 2 is 6 times, 2 is 7 times. So the population from 70 is doubled 7 times in 215 years. You get to 8,960 people. It's a little short of a million. But let's just do that. So that's 215 is 7 times. So 430 would be 7 more times. So let's just keep that same number because now we have an extra 7 times. So let's do times 2 once, times 2 twice, times 2 3 times, times 2 4 times, times 2 5 times, times 2 6 times, times 2 7 times. You get 1,146,880. And the 600,000 men that is said to have been there as part of the army, that'd be 52% of that number. So about half men, half women. So that is when you take the same parameters. 30 years, the generation doubles every 30 years. But in a 430-year period, you have that population being able to double 14 times, not 7 times. And you get a number, because it's impossible in 215 years, starting with 70 people, to get to over a million people. That's just my own calculation. So I'm telling you the reason why I don't use the 215 years, why I use the 430, and why I don't trust the LLXX for anything, for all kinds of reasons. I just trust the MT, and this is why I don't subscribe to this 215, 215. And so I'm showing you how to measure the tabernacle. And genealogies, timelines are very important. If you use the LXX version, you can't use the first 1,656 years. You got to add 1,400 to it, and you can't use the second because it has a whole different genealogy, the canon. So the MT contains 24 books divided into the Torah, which are the law, the prophets, the writings, which is the basis for the Jewish Tanakh or the Jewish Bible, and of the Protestant Old Testament. The LXX, its canon is larger, includes additional books, sections not found in MT, known as the canonical books or canonical books. They're included in the Catholic and Orthodox Bibles, but has a different order for the biblical books with historical books grouped together, and poetic books grouped together. So what are the other arguments used or other things against the 430 years or some to try and confuse these arguments? Well, there's two. There's Stephen and there's Paul. So Stephen, in his sermon before the Sanhedrin, Stephen speaks of God's promise to Abraham in Acts 7:6. He summarizes the prophecy given to Abraham in Genesis 15:13, stating that Abraham's descendants would be strangers in a land belonging to others who would enslave them and afflict them for 400 years. So people say, well, it says 400, not 430. But he's quoting directly from the prophecy of Abraham, and his emphasis is on the duration of their enslavement and ill treatment rather than total time they were in Egypt. So, for example, when Jacob came into Israel, he was 100, or Egypt, he was 130 years old. He lived for another 17 years, so he's 147. They weren't enslaved at that time. They were given great lands, great pastures, so when you take 430 years from the time that he entered Egypt, it wasn't, all slavery and all enslavement. It started to become gradually and then quickly, as Jacob aged, they became more and more unknown to new emperors, new pharaohs, and they were thrown into slavery. So they were oppressed, for that period of time. It's not disputing or arguing against the 430 years. It's talking about exactly what the prophecy says, their affliction. They're being afflicted until the Exodus. Also in Paul. So Paul in Galatians is discussing the timing of the law in relationship to the promise made to Abraham. He states the law, introduced 430 years later, does not set aside the covenant previously established by God, which is the covenant to Abraham, so as to nullify the promise, because he's talking about the seed of Abraham and the faith versus the law and the people trying to make it just about Judaism or just about the Israelites. So Paul uses the 430-year time frame to make a theological point about the priority of God's covenant of grace with Abraham over the Mosaic law. His argument is not about the historical details of the sojourn, but about the order and nature of God's redemptive plan. So, but isn't Jacob entering into Egypt the beginning of that covenant fulfillment promise? That 430-year promise, that's when the covenant, the promise to Abraham is begins to be fulfilled when he says, you know, your descendants will enter there. And Paul's talking about the covenant being 430 years before the law. It was 430 years after Jacob entered that Moses led the Exodus out of Egypt. So um, the differing numbers don't represent a contradiction, but rather reflect on different aspects of the same event being emphasized by two different writers. 400 years. Stephen, a number emphasizing the period of actual oppression and enslavement as foretold in Genesis 15. Paul, 430 years, a precise figure of their sojourn in Egypt before the Exodus under Moses. Jacob entered Egypt in 1876. The Exodus was 1446, 430 years to the day. So I'm just trying to straighten up some confusion about what is called contradictions, which aren't contradictions. This one's very important. 400 years versus 215. So they say, well, one of the arguments used is about why for 215 years is because there's only four generations. There are three generations listed for Levi before Moses. So how can that happen? It has to be 215 years. You wouldn't have, 430 years is way too long for just to have three generations of Levites before Moses. Well, let's just add this up because we forget. Jacob was 77 years old when he went to his uncle Laban's household, and he agreed to serve him for 7 years to marry his younger daughter, Rachel. After the 7 years, Laban tricked Jacob into marrying his older daughter, Leah. Leah gave birth to Jacob's first son, Reuben, about 1 year later, when Jacob was 84 years old. The birth of his next two sons, Simon and Levi, followed in consecutive years. Therefore, Levi was born as Jacob was about 87 years old. So Levi's birth is when Jacob was already 87 years old. So Jacob was 130 when he entered Egypt with his family. Well, how old would that make Levi? That'd make Levi 43 years old when they entered. So Exodus 6 gives the lifespan of the descendants of Levi, named in the Bible until the birth of Moses. Levi, he lived 137 years. So he starts off at 43 when he enters. He lived 137. Kohath lived 133 years. Amram, which is Moses' father, lived 137 years. Add those up, 137, 133. Well, that's 270 right there. Another 137. So you get 407 years right there. Abraham was the father of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Moses was 80 at the Exodus. So it was, but Aram, his father, lived another 16 years after the birth of Moses. So this seamless transition. So when Moses was born, his father continued to live. And it was while he was 16. So, and remember that Moses left himself. He left Egypt the first time when he was 40. So you can see that these numbers all work. this 4 generations from Levi to Moses doesn't have to squish into 215 years because you can look at the lifespans. You can see it for yourself. Add it up. So over 400 years right there to Moses, So that's an important point that I want to point out too. These are all reasons that I'm showing you why I don't use the 215 years being separated into uh, Canaan and separated into Egypt, because the MT text says exactly 430. That addition isn't found anywhere else but the LXX. And when you do the numbers and you just think through common sense and you read the scriptures, 430 years is so obvious, it's unbelievable. But here's another main reason I don't use it. So I told you that the LXX adds to or takes away different things from that are in the MT, in the Hebrew MT. Well, if you went to in the LXX, Exodus 36, the LXX wipes out verse 8 to 38. And that's about the tabernacle measurements and two specific things. So if I use the LLX, because if you're going to use it for one thing, if you're going to say the 215 years, you got to use it for everything. You got to use it for the first gene because that's the text you're relying on. That's the source you're relying on, the LXX. So you got to use the 1440 extra years in the first genealogy. You got to use this misplaced, second genealogy, and you got to use the tabernacle measurements and the tabernacle, and that whole thing's in different order. They don't start off with the most holy thing. It's all mixed up. They remove major sections of the um, pattern given to Moses, and so that's where we're going to start today. We're going to start with what's wiped out here, which are two major things that are talked about here: the tabernacle coverings and the tabernacle boards. So I'm going to read it to you just this one time, and then we'll go from here. So, and it also talks about the craftsmen that were brought in to make it. And these, by name, these people's names and their fathers are found now on stones in Egypt, right at that time, 1446. And every wise-hearted man among them that wrought the work of the tabernacle made 10 curtains of fine twined linen and blue and purple. And this is talking about the main covering over the sanctuary, uh, and scarlet, with cherubim of cunning work made he them. The length of one curtain was 28 cubits, and the breadth of one curtain was 4 cubits, so 28 by 4. The curtains, which is 112, the curtains were all of one size. And he coupled the 5 curtains one into another, and the other 5 curtains one into the other. So there's 10 curtains, each one's 112 cubits, 28 by 4. He couples 5 together, and then another 5 together, joins them all together as one curtain, which is a total 1120 cubits. And it shows how he looped them together, 50 loops made in one curtain, 50 in the other, which was the coupling of the second. The loops held one curtain to another, made 50 taches of gold, couple the curtains one onto another. So it became one tabernacle, one covering for the entire sanctuary. And he made curtains of goat's hair. So this is the one that goes on top of it. And remember the other day we added up all the soft materials, including these last 2 coverings. Goat's hair for the tent over the tabernacle. 11 curtains. Why? Because this is covering over the covering of the sanctuary, this beautiful covering. They had a rougher goat's hair covering to protect that covering. So it's a little bit bigger. And it's dimensions given here. The length of one curtain was 30 cubits. So instead of being 28, it's 30 by 4 instead of 28 by 4. The breadth of one curtain. And there's an extra curtain. The 11 curtains were of one size. And he coupled 5 curtains by themselves and 6 curtains by themselves. And then he made the loops upon the outermost edge of the curtain, the coupling, and he made them upon the edge of the curtain, which coupled the second. and he made, instead of gold, he made brass to couple the tent together, so it might be one. So this was all joined together also, and its dimension was 1,320 cubits as one covering for the tent. Then it says he made two other coverings of ram skins dyed red and a covering of badger skins. But those dimensions are never given anywhere. The last dimension that you're given is for that goat's hair covering. And there's a reason for that. We'll get into it tomorrow. So that's on the coverings. And this is also is eliminated in the LXX, which is on the tabernacle boards. Beginning in verse 20. And he made boards for the tabernacle of shittim wood standing up. So they were upright boards. The length of the board was 10 cubits. The breadth of the board was 1.5 cubits. So they were 10 high, 1.5 wide. One board had two tenons, which were like little places to put like little protruding tenons so that they could fit into the socket, equally distant one from the other. Thus did he make for all the boards of the tabernacle. He made boards for the tabernacle, 20 boards to the south side, and 40 sockets, because each board went into it's like 2 feet. So one tenon in one on the other. And so these sockets, there was 40 sockets. We'll see it in a minute here. 20 boards. So on the south side, there's 20 boards and 40 sockets. And for the other side, which is the north side, he also made 20 boards. And there are 40 sockets of silver, one under one, two under the other. And for the sides of the tabernacle, so that's for the end, the far end, where that's the wall of the most holy place. And he made 6 boards. So, and then he made 2 boards for corners of the tabernacle. So there's 20 and 20, which is 40, and then 6. And then you have these 2 corner boards. So, but we know that the inner sanctuary, whether it says 10 by 10 by 10, the inside of that sanctuary. So there's only 6 boards there. We got a problem because each board's are 1.5 wide. 6 times 1.5 is only 9. And we solved that together in previous meetings, because the other 2 corner boards, a third of each one of the corner boards protruded into the sanctuary. So when you have those 2/3 in there, then you end up with the 10 inside the sanctuary. So really it's 40 boards, 20 and 20, plus 6, plus a third of each one is really 46.666 boards. We're going to see that in a little bit, but I'm just going to, then it talks about the bars and the things that hold it all together. So that's what we're going to talk about. And remember, the spirit that we're talking about, why are we studying these things? Because they're showing us new light, new things that have been there from old, but that we observe that hasn't been observed before, is given to us as this testimony to help evangelize. We talked about Elijah and John. The message is the Elijah message, and Elijah was a forerunner, stood up against all the apostasy of Jezebel and the false high priest. John was the forerunner for Jesus, lived in the very generation that Jesus came in, prepared the people, fought against the false religion, argued against that, and did baptism, which was the full immersion to wash and prepare and repent for the coming of the Lord. So we compare these, in past lessons, Elijah and John the Baptist, how they're both were familiar with this rugged outdoor life. Both were called the people back to God. Both condemned sinful kings. Both were hated and hounded by godless women. Both became discouraged. Both were comforted by Christ himself. Both were often associated with each other. Both were widely acknowledged as men of God. John prepared the way for the first coming of Christ, and the Elijah message will prepare the way for Christ's return. And here's all the texts that back that up. what's our calling which is listed in Revelation 10. Um, and and it's the same calling that Ezekiel was given in Ezekiel 2, 8, 9, 3, 1, etc. And it's basically Ezekiel's shown a scroll, told to digest it all. And once he's digested it all, then to go out and prophesy to the people. And the seventh generation of the in the book of Revelation, the same thing, shown this open book. Remember, the book of Daniel was closed and sealed, and it was promised to be opened in the end times. Here's this open book, and this last generation through John is told to do the same thing. Eat it up, digest it, make it be part of you. Then, when you're finished doing that, then go out and evangelize. It says, and he said unto me, thou must prophesy again before many peoples, nations, and tongues and kings. So this is the last call, the last generation before the return of Christ. And then he says, in the very next chapter, rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there. So we've done some measuring of, well, I'll get to that in a second. So, but one of the things that the book of the LXX eliminates, one of the texts that eliminates is Jeremiah 33:3. Call to me, and I will answer you and show you great and mighty things which you do not know. There's lots of reasons not to use or trust the LXX. So what we did briefly up until now is we took a look at the Ark of the Covenant, and particularly the mercy seat, and we looked at its dimensions of having a width of 1.5 and a length of 2.5. And we noticed and we started to observe how the biblical timeline from Adam to Jesus is exact where he came to perform this atonement, this fulfilled the promise given to Adam, the first prophecy in Genesis 3, that being the seed of the woman, being born of the virgin, he came to do that, and he came to crush the head of Satan. So we notice that the timeline from Adam to the flood of Noah was 1656 years. That's why we can't use the LXX, because we've got to add 1440 years to that. And then we noticed that the time from the ark to the ministry of Jesus was 2484 years. I just went through some of that with you a few minutes ago. So that's 2.5 or 1.5, this number, 1.5 the number of the ark. And the total timeline from Adam to Jesus is 4140 years, which is 2.5, the same as the length of the mercy seat. And this mercy seat is where that atonement happened through the high priest once a year on the Day of Atonement, with his blood brought in by the anointed, um, and this timeline, not only just this timeline, but these smaller timelines, everything before the ark, everything after is 1.5 times 2.5. So we'll get into more of that later. I'm just showing that we've already kind of taken a quick look at the importance of the ark and the mercy seat timeline and the actual observed timeline. We then looked briefly at all the soft measures we just talked about. We looked at the white linen fencing, and we added up the dimensions because they're supposed to measure. And we added up this first gate, the entrance gate, and it's 100 cubits. So we had 1400 plus 100. Then this first sanctuary door, that's another 100 cubits. Then the veil that was between the holy place and the most holy place, another 100 cubits. And then we're just talking about that covering, that 28 by 4 by 112 by 10 is 1120 cubits. So we added that in there, and that was that covering of the whole sanctuary, blue, purple, scarlet, covered in cherubim. And then that goat's hair covering, I just talked about, which is a little bigger, was 1320. And when we add them all up, we get the same 4140, which is the same timeline from Adam to Jesus, 4140. And all of these soft materials represent the flesh, the earthly ministry of Christ. And that's when he came, 4140. So, and we can look at, what do these mean? The white, the righteousness of the saints. You can go through each one of these and look at all, mean something, and all speak of Christ. So, these are the things that I'm just checking my timer. So, um, so we looked at that briefly. We looked at the big picture. We looked at the fact that when Solomon began his temple, and then when the temple was completed, which was in the way, was exactly 1,500 years after the flood. But then it sat empty. It wasn't used for 12 years until 946 BC, which was 1,512 years after the flood. Then we look at, the words of Peter, the words of Moses. A day is like 1,000 years to the Lord, and 1,000 years is like a day. That's important. We're going to start applying that over and over again to the 7 days and the prophecy of his return. Why did Jesus come at that time, etc. But we first apply it in this big picture here because Christ was believed to be born between 4 and 6 BC, and that's exactly because 6 BC is exactly 1,500,000 days from Adam. So that's a day per 1,000 years, 1,000 years per day. That's 1,000 times. His ministry began in 4140, 1512, 1,512 days from Adam to that ministry. If you take 1512000 divided by 4,140 years, you get how many days per year. So this whole temple itself, when it was built and when it was consecrated, in other words, put into use, made its purpose fulfilled. If you times that by 1,000, like a day per year, it matches up exactly to the birth of Christ and his ministry beginning. And so I'm showing parallels from the temple, of the temple. I'm going to show you a rule that's very important. We've talked about before. I'm going to explain a little bit more detail. So the relationship between 6.9 and 7, or so 6.9 divided by 7, and or 7 divided by 6.9, is the exact same difference between an observed solar year and a 360-day prophetic years. In other words, if you take 7 divided by 6.9, you get this long number, 1 point, and you can let's take your calculators out right now and just verify this for yourself. Take 7 divided by 6.9, you have that long number there, 1.014, etc. And then just times that by 360, and you get 365.21. So you get the amount of days in an observed year. So an observed solar year in this scenario is exactly 5,217,3913 days longer. So just take this number, the extra 5.217 over here, that's longer than a prophetic year. Then we just take the number 360 and you divide it by 69, you get the same number, 5.2173913. So what that means, to save everybody a headache, is that every 69 solar years equals 70 prophetic years. And so you can use this to convert any number of observed solar years to a prophetic, or vice versa. So in other words, you take 1656, which are observed years, the years to the flood, and you divide that by 6.9 because it's observed. And then you just times that by 7, you get the prophetic. It's 1,680 prophetic years. Or if you take the prophetic years, 1,680, and you divide it by 7 because they're prophetic, and times it by 6.9 because it's observed, you get 1656. So you can convert any observed year through prophetic year through this little calendar, come up with this little kind of not trick, this little kind of tool, I guess. This simple calculation has a 99.995% accuracy versus observed time. And just to give you some context for that, a purity of 0.99995 is extremely high. And this is when you just get into chemicals and gold and things. It's often referred to as 4.5 nines and is considered ultrafine or high grade. The remaining 0.005% is trace impurities. So let's just compare that to a few things because I want you to be confident in using that number. In precious metals, 4 nines, 0.9999 is already considered exceptionally pure, but 0.9995 is even purer. In specialty gas industry, a 4.5 grade gas corresponds to 99.995. This level of purity is necessary for high sensitive research and medical applications where impurities can affect results. So this number is as pure as those numbers. Chemistry, anything above 99.9 is considered high purity. So 0.99995 is far higher standard. And here's the most important one. A calendar that is 99.995% accurate is incredibly precise. For context, the highly refined Gregorian calendar that we use today is only accurate to about 99.992. So it's extremely reliable to use 6.9 divided by 7 or 7 divided by 6.9 to convert prophetic into observed or observed into prophetic. And the main takeaway there is whenever we see 69 or 6.9 or 690 observed years, remember that equals 7 or 70 or 700 prophetic years. And you can see why that's important as we go along. So I want to introduce that little rule. I'm telling you, how do we measure the tabernacle? Remember yesterday when we talked about all these false temples, the temples of the false religions, and how they're really all observatories of time, and how if you put, right in the center of the altar, and that light shines through each of these areas. These stones are put there on purpose, or in temples, doors are open or windows, so that when they know the sun's already going to shine or the stars are going to shine, they want it to shine on their objects of worship to make it look as if they're being blessed by the gods. That on this day of the year, or this special time, that light shines on it, so they can deceive the people. So temples have always been an observatory of time. The difference with the tabernacle or the temple of God is it's not waiting for some fake light to shine on it. It was given to Moses, the pattern, and it was when the Son of God would appear at the temple. The one who gave it would appear at the temple. It's given to Moses when the Son of God would return for his people, his temple that he built without hands. So but there's the element of time in the tabernacle and in the temple pattern is prophetic time, observed times of the Lord. So, and I'm talking fast because I don't have so much time today. We're running a little bit late. But let's compare the 6.9 or the 1656 period from Adam to Noah, and then the 2484 period from Noah to the ministry of Christ, and just look at observed time. So when we observe that in a clock, 16.56 hours is exactly 69% of a 24-hour day. And 6.9 days is 165.6 hours because it's 24 times 6.9. So this 6.9, 1656 is tied into this 24-hour day that way. But also, this 0.69 of a 24-hour day is 0.69 of a 360-degree clock. So it's 248.4 degrees. Exactly right there. Same word as 1656. That rotation is 248.4 degrees. And 6.9 days is 2480 degrees. So it's this clock would go around 360 6.9 times because it's 6.9 days, 248.4 degrees. And we observe that 6.9 in observed time is 7 in prophetic. So 1656 observed years is 1680 prophetic. 24 times 7, so 7-day week is 168 hours. 24 times 70, 1680. So we start to see the Sabbaths and the Sabbath weeks and months. 2,484 observed years is 2,520 prophetic. That's 36 times 360 times 7. 4,140 observed years is 4,200 prophetic, or 600 times 7. And you're going to notice something that I'll emphasize more and more and show you as we, every one of those events, 621, 1035, 1656, every one of those is 6.9 observed or 7 prophetic. They all occur on a seventh, and it's like a Sabbath week, the Sabbath year, Jubilee, 7 times 7 times 7. This whole thing, so all those timelines, we see the Sabbath. Elder John just spoke about how the law, how the ordinances and how the holy days expand on the Sabbath. And this whole tabernacle. You read the book of Revelation, you can't not read it without seeing 7, 7, 7, and 7 is always the fulfillment of whatever it is. It's all about the Sabbath, but it's also about the holy days of the tabernacle. And they all show up in the tabernacle itself and in the observed timeline from Adam all the way to Christ, all the way to our day. It repeats over and over. And so we've only looked at a few artifacts. I want to show you now as we look at a couple of the remaining ones. So this is what we read about. We read about these tabernacle boards. We read about these silver sockets. There's 2 for every 1 board because the board goes into each one of these little tenons. We have the coverings. We see that blue covering that goes all the way over the sanctuary. These veils that are in between it, with this special one being the same thing with cherubim on it, separating the holy place from the most holy place. The goat's hair above it, the ram skin dyed red, the leather one on top of it. So this is the structure that was given exactly to Moses, make it exactly like this. We have the furnishings inside. We have the Ark of the Covenant. We have the altar of incense, menorah, the table of showbread, and out in the courtyard we have the lever, and we have the altar. So we're looking at these 2 things, which, like I said, were excluded from that LXXS rating, and see if they testify the same thing. Well, if you take that 1120 and you just multiply that by the dimensions of the ark, here's what you get. So the width of the ark we know is 1.5. 1120 is that inner sanctuary dimension. That's the dimension of this covering, 1120. So 1.5 times 1120 equals 1680, which is the exact amount of prophetic years from Adam to the Ark of Noah. 1656 years is 1680 prophetic years. We take the 1120 and we haven't included this dimension yet, but we're going to show it tomorrow. 1.5 times 1.5, which is the height as well. So 1.5 times 1.5 is 2.25. So 1120 times 2.25 is 2,520, which is exactly equal to the prophetic years from the ark to the ministry of Jesus. Because 2,484 prophetic years equals 2,520, 2,484 observed years equals 2,520 prophetic. If you want to take a little break here and we'll measure that up for yourself, just takes 2,484 divided by 6.9 times 7. You get 2,520. Or take 1656 divided by 6.9 times 7, you'll get 1680. Or if you take the mercy seat dimensions, 1.5 by 2.5, then you times that by 1120. That's 1.5 by 2.5 is 375. 375 times 1120 is 4,200, which is the exact prophetic years from Adam to the ministry of Jesus. So if you go 4140 divided by 6.9 times 7, you get 4,200. 4,200 prophetic years is 4,140 observed. That is not made up. That's already in the tabernacle. And we got the same numbers again that we got with the ark, the same numbers we got with the all the soft materials. Again, we have it here in the tabernacle with this observatory of time, this prophetic time. Then we take all the dimensions and we go 1.5, which is the width, 2.5 the length, and then we take the height, which we're talking more about tomorrow, of 1.5. That equals 5.625. We times 5.625 times 1120, we get 6,300, which equals, and that's the last measurement you get in the thing. That's when all the measurements end. And 6,300 is 6,210 observed years. And that falls in our generation. In fact, beginning 2 years from now, that's the beginning of that last brick. So just take 6,300 divided by 7, because that's prophetic years, times 6.9, you get 6,210. So we've seen it here. But then we have to consider something else. It's a different way of looking at it. So let's compare them to the boards. Remember, we talked about the boards and the covering, the two things that the LXX eliminates us looking at. So the tabernacle covering was the 28 by 4, so it equals 112. Well, they're joined together as one equals 1120. Well, guess what? 112 hours divided by 24 is 4.66 days. And how does it work out? 28 hours, just like 28 boards, times 4 equals 112 hours. Divide 112 by 24, you get 4.66 days. And remember, we talking about a day versus 1,000 years, that a day, and how that is the model of both his creation and his redemption. And that's why people say, when he'll come, according to that same pattern. So times 10 is 46.6 days. So what is 46.66? Well, it's 7 times 666. So it's a reconciliation. It's judgment. It's the end of time for this Antichrist, this beast, but it's also blessing for the people of God, the seven. The seventh generation was Enoch, 621. So if you take 4140 divided by 621, which is the seventh generation, you get 666. So it's the seventh generation times 666 is still 4140. People have asked sometimes, Enoch was born in 622. Why do I use 621? Because I recognized long ago that all these numbers are all numbers of 69. So 621 is 9 times 69. The time after the flood, 1,035, is 15 times 69. 9 and 15 equals 24, just like a day. But the reason is because 621 years passed before 622. So 621 years passed between Adam and Enoch before the birth of Enoch, because we're not given the month when Enoch's born. The difference is with Noah, we know it was in the second month the ark, the 600 year, but we know when the flood came, the 17th day of the second month. We know it lasted 370 days, so it lasted more than a year. So you have to draw a line somewhere between on the 1656, a line somewhere between the 621 or 622. But get used to the fact that it's the years that pass. The very next tick on the clock is when the event should happen. So you read about in the flood, you read about in the building of the first year in the wilderness, etc. 360 days pass, and then the first day of the next year is when something happens. That's so as soon as you're finished 621, the first day of the next year is 622. So so you have to draw a line. I can explain it better later on, but 621 years pass by the time Enoch is born in 622, and 1656 years until Noah is in the 16th year. So again, that's 1035, and 621 equals 1656. So now let's compare some things we just looked at. The 46 and the 4666 tabernacle boards, because we saw there's 20 on one side, 20 on the other, 6 on the end, but you need a third of each corner board to come in. So it actually is 46.66 boards. In fact, each board we know is 1.5, right? It says it's 1.5 wide, 10 high. So what's 4666 times 1.5? That equals 70. Or you just go 70 divided by 1.5, you get 4666. So that's how you have this nice even number inside the sanctuary, the 10 by 10 by 10. And so let's look first of all at the 46 boards. Each board is 1.5. Now we just take that against a 24-hour day. 46 times 1.5 times 24 is 1656. That number again. Mercy seat 1.5. So we take 46.1.5 is 69. That number again. Times 1.5, which is the mercy seat dimension, times 24 is 2484. The same thing, we take the mercy seat length. So we have 69 times 2.5 times 24 equals 4140. And we take the height added to it, 46 times 1.5 to 2.5 equals 6210, which is the six, which falls in our generation. We'll ignore this one for right now. What happens if you take the 4666 boards, which is now, so these we just saw by taking just the 46 boards without adding those two corner boards. That's what you get. When you add the two corner boards, a third of each one's taken in, and you get this 4666. You get all the prophetic years, the same numbers, but this time 1680, 2520, 4200, 6300. So this, both the covering, which is 1120, and 1120 is 46.666 days, and these boards, the tabernacle, they're all related, and they all come up with the same witness about, because these dimensions, you can't change the dimensions of the ark. They're 1.5 by 2.5 by 1.5. You can't change the dimensions of the covering. It's 28 by 4 by 10. Just like 28 by 4 hours is 112, divided by 24 is 4.66 days. You can't change that. The sun and the moon and the stars won't allow you to change that. That's how we observe time. You can't change the boards because they're already there. Unless you use the LXX version, which you don't get a chance to see it, but you can't change it. They're there. And do they testify of different things? No, they all testify at the same thing, exact same thing. Major biblical events, major covenant events. The time from Adam to the flood of Noah. That's a major covenant event. There's only, Adam left as, the only one that God justified and called righteous. And through him would start, the new, the new beginning. But it was a judgment, just like in the garden, it was a judgment scene. The flood was a judgment. The time of Jesus was a judgment, good and bad. Daniel says that when, this is when he gave his prophecy, it's to seal up all vision and all prophecy, and to that's how much time your people had left before this judgment, this fulfillment of prophecy would happen. So, we have a comparison now, and tomorrow we'll begin to look at that last dimension I told you, because I said we haven't finished looking at the ark yet. So there's this crown that was put on top of the ark, right where, close, encircling this area where the blood of atonement was, but it's a separate event. And so if you take six, and that crown height was 1.5. So add them to the ark, to the mercy seat is 4140 times 1.5 is 6210. Crown 1656 times 2.5 times 1.5, 6210. Enoch, seventh generation from Adam, 6210, seventh generation from of Revelation, 62:1, 62:10. 4140 is the cornerstone of the tabernacle. That'd be the cornerstone event. That's when the cornerstone of the whole, tabernacle. That's the stone that the builders rejected. The ones that built the temples and are supposed to be observing them, and the ones that were made with hands, they rejected the one that gave the pattern, and the one that made the temple without hands, Jesus. That capstone event, because you also have to have a capstone. And if everything else isn't square, it doesn't fit perfectly, the capstone won't fit in. So that's the 6210. That's the crowning event. Well, that capstone begins to be set in 2027. According to all these numbers, they all equal the same thing, which is the beginning of a period that we'll see is actually going to be shortened because it's promised to be. So we don't know the hour or the day, but as John the Baptist, as Elijah, the message was, he's coming. He's coming soon, very soon. In our generation, those that are alive today will see his return. Not all of us, but those that are alive, will see his return without seeing death, just like Enoch, saw he walked with God, and then God took him without seeing death. So it's all related, it's all prophetic, it all ties together. And that's why when we look at these things, Elder John said, tabernacle should be a joy, should be a festive, should be exciting, should celebrate how we got there, and all the things that God's blessed us with. Well, when we're observing these tabernacle fulfillment, these things that other generations haven't seen, even those in our generation haven't seen, it shouldn't be about crossing your arms and saying, "Oh well, the 215 years doesn't fit my timeline," or whatever. Open yourself to the light. Open yourself to new light. That's what it is. It's not wrong that we observed something before, because that's the light we had. But now, as this light keeps flooding in, and especially as you see the light from the tabernacle, this everything I showed you, there's no Bible timeline there. We just use the Bible timeline to back it up to see if it makes sense. And we make sure we use the right Bible timeline. But the testimony, if I had no Bible timeline, I would still say the same numbers, 1656, 2484, 44, because the tabernacle, because the temple, the measurements that God gave Moses, that he was not supposed to deviate from, the ones that the apostles talk about, saying this was a pattern of the things to come from Christ. And when he began to fulfill at Passover, when he came and made the atonement, and the first fruits when he was risen, and Pentecost when he poured out the Holy Spirit, and now we're into the fall feast. That's the pattern. And it's never been really observed before, these fall feasts, how they're in the same tabernacle. The pattern continues after the cross because Christ continued after the cross to our time. So we'll look at those things tomorrow, but that's how we measure that's how we begin to rise and measure the tabernacle. And when we look at these events, we put them together, and I've shown this before, but these are the 621 to the 1035 to the total of 1656, and then the second period, the 2484, all the way to this outside circle being from Adam to our generation. And you see how connected they all are. There's no gaps. It's just 7 times 7 times 7. It's a continuation, and it's absolutely perfect. And it's absolutely beautiful. And these are all dimensions out of the tabernacle. I can show you every one of these. We can go back and look if we want. The 15255 from Moses to Jesus, 1035 from Enoch to the flood, 1656, 2484, 4140, 621. Like they're all from the tabernacle. The 6210, is 3.75 times. So this whole thing, that's how we learn to rise and measure the tabernacle. We don't go to Jerusalem because it's the tabernacle and the temple's been destroyed. We go to the Bible. We search our hearts. We search prophecy. But we look at that pattern. That pattern is only found in the covenant code, the book of the law, which has all the ordinances, the Ten Commandments, all the holy days, all the holy ways, all the statutes. That's where these are found. And we don't need to find a book called the covenant code because Moses wrote about them all in the 5 books that he wrote. And he put that book beside the Ark of the Covenant when they're about to enter the promised land, and he was told he wouldn't be entering, and he was to anoint Joshua. That was the witness. This covenant code was the witness against man. Was that, to keep these things. And of course, as we've shown for the past 6 days, man has, totally, especially through religious observations, totally decided themselves what's good and what's evil, and tried to do away with the law of God, with all these observations, and that's why they'd be blinded, because you can only see this pattern I'm showing you by knowing the things of the Bible, by observing the very times given in the Bible, whether it's a holy day, recognized as Sabbath, or Day of Atonement, whether it's a year is 1,000 days, like 1,000 years, 1,000 like a day, whether it's a prophetic year being 360, but that all comes from the Bible and from studying the Bible and not from anywhere else. And so that's how, just like the Pharisees, who thought that they were just the most experts on the Bible. Jesus said, "You search the scriptures looking for eternal life, but they spoke about me. Uh, you know, you should have known me." And so they're so into their rituals and into their appearance of holiness that they were blind. The ones who should have recognized first the coming of the Messiah, their own envies, their own pride, their own not wanting to be replaced, they wanted to be that whole thing kept them from observing the fulfillment of the covenant. And it won't be any different in the end times. It's uh, yeah, we have to open ourselves to the light and be able to see it, and we have to measure it. And we only just begun. It says digest the book. We've only just started to look at it. Never mind digest the whole book. But 2 years from now is something, something's going to happen. It could be the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. It could be anything, that whatever God's chosen for that time. But the capstone will be laid then. What event that is, we don't know. You know, But anytime during, I mean, Christ can come at any time, of course, but something very significant is coming. And we should be digesting this book and proclaiming it and getting ready to be empowered by the Holy Spirit to give it to kings, nations, etc., like it tells us to do in Revelation 10 and 11. So that's my time for today.
Yeah.
That was really good. It just shows so much detail that God did that nobody even knew until now. People might see pieces of it, but I mean, to have everything within, an inch and everything, and it all means something.
Yeah,
It's just amazing.
it's hard sometimes to let go of things, and it is for all of us. To receive something, you have to let go of something, right? Like the way they catch those little monkeys in the jungle, it's interesting. They just put a shiny object inside of a soda bottle, and then they tether that soda bottle so that it's chained down.
Anchored.
And the little monkey puts his hand in to grab the shiny object, the ball, but his fist is closed, so he can't take it out because he refuses to drop that shiny object. And they walk right up to that monkey that's holding the shiny object, and they take him captive for the rest of his life. So that reminds us we got to let go of some of these shiny objects sometimes to be free. In order to be free, we got to sometimes let go of things that we really treasured in the past, like our past knowledge or timelines or whatever. We can't be afraid of new light to go, okay, well, okay, now I understand. Let me see this. It's like Paul reasons with various Jews and wrote the book of Hebrews to reason with them and show them something new. And those that wanted the truth agreed in the end with Paul. Yes, this is the Messiah. This is the fulfillment. But others that wouldn't even
So,
hear it,
somebody asked a question.
go ahead.
Somebody said, so even though 6210 will end the 2097, the 0 to 69 capstone begins 2027, cut short, question mark?
So there's a brick.
6210
Yeah,
ends,
I can't hear you really well, but so I think
Is it cut short?
wait a minute. He says the 6210, I guess he got it from what you said, will end in 2097. The 0 to 69 capstone begins in 2027.
yeah. So the capstone it actually ends in 2096 and begins in 2027. But there's very specific, which we'll see tomorrow, times within that window where God is always active. So um, the and the events of the end time, the return of Christ is far more reminiscent of early time in that capstone of him acting, not later time. So in other words, there's events that happen that begin to happen immediately when that time comes, but it carries on. So for example, even when Christ was resurrected, there was a period of time for the apostles to stay for 3.5 years, in Jerusalem, and then a period of time for them to spread out, and then a period of time all the way up to the destruction of the temple. So there's various things that happen, but but sometimes things happen closer to the beginning, sometimes closer to the end, but it's within that 69-year window. And from everything I've
That
studied,
begins the seventh day, doesn't it?
no, the seventh day. So as soon as the sixth ends,
Right.
the next day is the seventh.
And that
So
is when?
it's what part of the seventh day? Is it early in the seventh day? Is it late in the seventh day?
Yes, I said.
So
So that
let me just
begins,
answer this.
I said
So
in
that,
the beginning of the day.
okay, you want me to answer it?
What? Go ahead.
Okay, so as soon as the sixth is over, the seventh begins. So in other words, let's say 6 days times 24 hours, 144 hours in 6 days. Okay. 145 hours would be the first hour of the seventh day. It goes from 145 to 168. So really, 145 hours is the beginning of the seventh day. 144 is the end of the sixth day. So if you look at observed time, 1887, 1888, that was 6,000. From that point on, we entered the beginning of the seventh day. So what part of the seventh day would it be likely that Jesus came? And I'll show you tomorrow that every one of those events, the 1656, the 2484, happened on the same part of the day. And it was early. It wasn't late. It was within the first third of that day, you know. So so you have to, we'll see more, but don't be too anxious for it. We don't know the date or time of his return, but we know the generation. And Jesus says, this generation will not pass till all is fulfilled. And he's talking, about his return prophetically and also to the disciples that were standing right there. So anyway,
This is Mark here. I do have a observation I want to make. You were towards the end of your presentation, you were talking about the birth dates, like 621, 622.
yeah,
When you write it down numerically. My birthday every year, which is the same day and month every year, is April the 28th. So when you write it, it's forward dash or slash 28. What you need to do is just multiply 4 times 7 equals 28. So I do have a perfect number 7 in there. Now, I'm not into numerology, or in Hebrew we use the word gematria, so I don't make a big deal out of it. It's just an observation there. So I just
right.
wanted to let you know. Easy to remember.
And now I know you're special, but I've always known that.
Thank you, Baruch Hashem, Hashem Yeshua. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Okay, Brent, I know I don't understand it well, but I think what he was saying, my question was, the 0 to 69 is a generation.
Right.
It looked like 0 would start another day, but evidently not.
No,
There you
no,
go.
it's like when you go to uh the Jubilee, you know, there's 49 years, and then the 50th year was the Jubilee. But actually, it was the first year also of the next 49 years. And that's
Right.
where there's a lot of errors. And also on the Sabbath, it's the 7 days is 1 week. The eighth day is really the first day of the next 7 day cycle.
But the seventh year has nothing to do with the generation time.
What's that?
The seventh day, the start of it, has nothing to do with the generation of 69.
Well, it began with Ellen White, really. The seventh day began
Right,
with
I
Ellen White,
understand.
and it began at a very specific time, and so it began with her and her companions, that they were the beginning of the 144,000. And think of the fact of why this makes sense.
That's what I said,
Okay,
is the
I'm with you.
generation.
Okay, just think of this for a second, Sandy. 6 times 24 is 144. So 144 hours is 6 days completed. If you say a day for 1,000 years, 144,000 would be 6 days completed when a day is worth 1,000 years. That's when the 144,000 began to be sealed at the end of the sixth day, which was 1887, 1888 being the first day of the seventh. So things happen after, just like Enoch, they happen right after the fulfillment. But, if we get too far ahead of ourselves, we just get confused. So are you guys, I can see you talking, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. But yeah, the last 69, your little window begins in 2027 and goes to 2096. And in that in that window is where Christ may possibly return.
Right. Like there's a window, a 69-year window that began with Christ too, his first come, but he fulfilled all things in the first 33 years. The years after that was other things being done, but his birth and his atonement was in the first 33 years of that
Good point.
69 um,
Sure.
year period. That brick, because that brick, actually, I showed you a little bit today, but that brick, that 69-year brick, ended just before 6 BC. So from 6 BC for the next 69 years was that brick. And that's when the cornerstone got laid, was right in that at that time. So, but if you look at what happened with all the apostles, and when was the temple destroyed? 70 AD, just after the next brick.
Sure.
So it's it's just these sevens keep repeating because the Sabbath keeps repeating. There's been a Sabbath ever since Adam. Sabbath's been kept by somebody, So 7, 7, 7, and it's just a continuous cycle. But there's high points to that. God gave high points to high Sabbaths and Sabbath weeks and the Sabbath years and the Jubilees. And in that same way, there's high points to this pattern of fulfillment of 7. And there's also high points for judgment, the 666. 666 times 7. God says, well, 4666 is also 777 times 6. How long should I endure? 7 times or 7 times 7 times? Well, it's the same thing. So there's a point of maximum tolerance till judgment, by God. There's also a high point of blessings and grace for his people, of fulfillment. But the fulfillment for one isn't necessarily the good news of the other. It's the same day, but not the same blessing or curse. So anyway,
Yeah. Yeah, I had another fun thought the other day was we were talking about AI and such, and I had a fun idea. As you're looking at that last window, 2027 to 2096, I thought, I wonder if he does come in that period, maybe when, I don't know. And I started thinking about the AI and the progress that the whole world's going after, and we got AI, we got incredible weapons or incredible robots or whatever takes over the world and such. I thought we can't go too far. It can't be too far. It's just a
yeah,
fun thought, though.
no,
But
Is
another thought I had. So is this accurate to say that if you look at Genesis 5 and you see the time frame from Adam to what's the 1656? Is that to
Noah.
Noah? And you take that 1656 and you look at the ark and the equation there, you get 1656, and that's in the most holy. And then you look at the walls, and you find the equation inside the most holy place. The walls also equate to 1656, and then you look at the ceiling of the most holy place, and the equation results in 1656.
Yeah,
And what about the floor? I was just wondering about the floor.
the floor was
The
dirt.
area.
The floor was dirt, but it would have the same measurement. It'd be 1120 as well,
1120.
because that's the
Okay.
area inside the sanctuary.
Okay.
So, the whole thing, was based on that. But it's, yeah, like I said, it's all a testimony, and it was all given to a man in the wilderness who claimed that he met with God, and that God gave him this pattern. And so everyone should think, well, there's no way that should have any sort of relevance today. It was some shepherd, and yet you see, all this, and you see it now. And it wasn't like the apostles didn't see it. When Jesus told them, He walked with them on the road to Damascus. He opened up their eyes to the scriptures. He started with Moses, showing them how it all pointed to him. Well, what do you think he showed them from Moses? You know, the tabernacle and these things, how they all pointed to him, the sacrifice and all this stuff. And they wrote about it themselves. They said, they called Christ the first fruits of the Passover, and they said it's a copy and shadow of things to come. And they said that's why Moses was told not to deviate, because it all spoke about Christ. So they knew there's some parts of scripture, like in the book of Hebrews, it says it's talking about the most holy place. And it says the Spirit prevented us to say much more.
Ah,
They weren't allowed to say any more about all this relationship with, because they were talking right then about the holy place, most holy place, the manna, the what was inside the ark, what was, and they said, and we're prevented from saying anymore. They knew more than they said because Christ revealed
yeah.
it to them. And this was Paul. I don't know whether that was revealed just to Paul or revealed to all of them, but they knew and they wrote about the tabernacle and they wrote about its relationship. That's why, every Christian knows that Christ is the Passover lamb because it's in the Bible. The apostles wrote about it. And why do we know? Well, because he came on the same day and in the same way. So we're not saying anything different now. We're just showing more. We're just showing it, not just in the holy days, but that the whole tabernacle was built around those holy days and around those observances, and that actually is the whole pattern from Adam of God's plan of redemption, including the lives of everybody that lived there, all his people. He had them fulfill this temple without hands was all these living bricks, including us. We're the last group of living bricks. We happen to be born, some of us near the end of the brick before and into the final brick. Some like your kids, born, very early into that, and so it's just that, but you know, those born there were people in our generation. We don't know how many, but like I said, the things in the past have all happened early into that brick. The longest being like a third of the way into it, So I expect, um, that a lot of people that are alive today will still be alive when he returns, but I have no idea, and I never try and guess because it's impossible. And even if you did, even if you knew the day and the hour, then you got to deal with where it says it'll be shortened because of the evil of the world. No matter what day, even if you said it's going to be 2046, I know it because it's exactly where it points to. Well, then what about when it says it will be shortened because of the times, of the mercy of God to save his people? He's going to have to shorten the timeline.
Yeah. Or
Is
there's no
that by a
flesh in heaven.
year? Is that by 10 years? So even if you did know, so anyone who says this is the hour and day of Christ's return is crazy because they're putting themselves out of the gospel, out of the position they're given. You can say, hey, I expect it's going to be here because of all this, but really, you don't know what event it is that you're talking about. Just like, what happened in 1844. They had the right timeline, but they had the wrong event, and that's the danger, so all that we know is that the tabernacle pattern runs out by 2096. There's no more dimensions it can't go longer than that period because there's no more dimensions you can add. And that last brick gets laid around 2027. So somewhere in that window between 2027 and 2096, by the pattern of the tabernacle, it clearly shows that that's when we should expect Christ to return. We don't have to be embarrassed to be looking at, because when the disciples asked him, "When will you return?" Jesus didn't rebuke him. He told them, watch this, watch the watchman. It'll be a long journey, etc. You don't know the hour of the day, so watch and pray. So
Yeah, very good. And I was just thinking, John says, rise and measure the temple. And
That's what
and
she did.
Ezekiel says, show the house to the house, show the
Yeah.
house to the house. And that's what you're
Exactly what
doing.
he says, yeah.
Yeah.
And he's the one that's